Everyone in the room stared at the little girl when she said it. Her voice was small, trembling, almost lost in the echo of the school board hall. I told my mom not to miss work, because when adults get mad, kids disappear. A 7-year-old said that. And suddenly the entire room went quiet. Teachers stopped whispering. Parents lowered their phones. Even the powerful woman who had been running the school like her personal kingdom looked away. Because sometimes truth doesn't come from lawyers or rich CEOs. Sometimes it comes from a little girl who had once been forced to sit outside a school gate, while every other child walked inside. But the real question isn't what she said. The real question is this: why was she outside that gate in the first place? And how did a quiet millionaire CEO end up risking his reputation, his company, and his entire future, just to make sure one little girl wasn't left behind? If you believe kindness still matters in this world, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Stories like this remind us that even small acts of courage can change someone's life forever. Now let me take you back to the morning when this story truly began. It was a warm summer morning outside Westbrook Elementary. The kind of morning where the sun felt gentle and the air smelled like fresh pavement and coffee. Parents pulled up in shiny SUVs. Mothers stepped out holding iced coffees. Fathers checked their phones while walking their children toward the gate. Kids in crisp uniforms laughed and ran ahead, backpacks bouncing behind them. From the outside, everything looked perfect. Westbrook Elementary had that kind of reputation. A private academy with polished brochures, clean hallways, and proud banners about leadership and opportunity. Families paid a lot of money to send their children there. And the school made sure everyone knew it. The tall iron gate buzzed open again. A security guard nodded politely as another group of children hurried through. The gate closed. Then it opened again. Another wave of students entered. To most people, it looked like an ordinary school morning. But systems often look ordinary, until someone gets left outside them. 7-year-old Emma Carter sat quietly on the curb beside the gate. She hugged her backpack tightly against her chest. Her uniform had once been navy blue. Now the color had faded into something tired and uneven, like the fabric had seen too many washes and too many long days. The sleeves were a little short. The hem had been stitched carefully by hand where it had torn. Her shoes were clean but worn thin at the edges. Shoes that had clearly walked farther than most second graders ever needed to. Emma watched the other kids go inside. Some waved to friends. Some laughed loudly. Some didn't even notice her sitting there. Inside her backpack were only a few things. A math workbook, 2 pencils inside a small plastic case, and a folded piece of paper she had already read too many times. She held that paper now. Her small fingers gripped the edges so tightly that the corners were starting to bend. The final warning bell rang faintly from the building. The gate buzzed open again. 3 more children hurried inside. Then it closed. Emma looked at the metal latch sliding into place. Her shoulders sank just a little. A school office assistant stepped outside holding a clipboard. She approached Emma slowly, lowering her voice the way adults often do when they want to sound gentle without actually changing anything. "Emma, sweetheart," the woman said softly. "We talked about this." Emma nodded quickly. Too quickly. Her fingers tightened around the folded paper. "You can't go into class until the balance is paid," the assistant continued quietly. "Your mom knows that." Emma nodded again. She had learned something recently. Nodding was easier than explaining. 2 girls from her class walked past and slowed down when they saw her sitting there. "Emma?" one of them asked. "Why aren't you coming in?" Emma's lips parted. For a moment, no sound came out. Then she whispered something so quietly it almost disappeared in the morning air. Everyone got into class. Her fingers trembled around the paper. Except me. Across the street, a black town car rolled slowly to the curb. The door opened. Jacob Reed stepped out. At 42 years old, Jacob Reed had built one of the most successful education technology companies in the country. People described him with the same words again and again. Quiet, disciplined, unshakably calm. He didn't shout in meetings. He didn't chase publicity. And he rarely stayed anywhere he wasn't wanted. Today he was supposed to attend a donor breakfast at Westbrook Elementary. 10 minutes of polite conversation. A few photographs he would decline. Then back to the real work of running a billion-dollar company. His driver closed the car door behind him. Breakfast starts in 10 minutes, Mr. Reed. Jacob adjusted the cuff of his navy suit jacket and started walking toward the gate. Then he heard it. A small voice drifting across the street. Everyone got into class, except me. Jacob stopped walking. Something about that sentence reached deeper than his ears. For a brief second, Jacob Reed wasn't standing on a city sidewalk anymore. He was 12 years old again, standing outside a school building in rural Oregon, listening to two boys laugh behind him. Scholarship kid. Bet he can't even pay for lunch. Jacob blinked. The memory faded. But the feeling didn't. Across the street, the little girl still sat on the curb. Her head was lowered. Her shoulders were shaking just slightly as she tried very hard not to cry. Jacob looked toward the school gate, then back at the girl. His driver cleared his throat. Mr. Reed. But Jacob didn't answer. Instead, he crossed the street. And a moment later, something happened that no one outside that school gate would ever forget. The quiet Millionaire CEO sat down beside the poor little girl on the curb. And the first question he asked her would change both of their lives forever. But Emma didn't answer right away. Because at 7 years old, she had already learned something painful about the world. Sometimes adults ask questions when they don't actually want to hear the truth. Emma stared at the man sitting beside her. Up close, he didn't look like the other parents rushing through the gate. Their clothes were neat, their smiles quick and distracted, like they were already thinking about meetings and errands waiting later in the day. This man looked different. His suit was expensive, that much was obvious. The fabric was smooth and dark, the kind of suit people wore in pictures inside magazines. But the way he sat there on the curb beside her didn't feel expensive at all. He rested his elbows on his knees, hands loosely clasped together, staring ahead at the quiet street like sitting on concrete outside a school was something he did every morning. Emma kept hugging her backpack. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Cars rolled past. A bird landed on the fence for a second before flying away again. Finally, the man turned slightly toward her. His voice was calm, warm, the kind of voice that didn't rush. "What's your name?" Emma hesitated. Children learned early that strangers asked questions for different reasons. Sometimes they were curious. Sometimes they were judging. She looked down at her shoes before answering. "Emma." The man nodded slowly. "Hi, Emma." He didn't offer his own name yet. That surprised her. Most adults liked introducing themselves first. Another quiet moment passed. The final bell rang inside the school building. The sound echoed faintly across the yard. Emma's fingers tightened around the folded paper again. The man noticed. His eyes moved gently to the paper in her hands. A bold red stamp stretched across the top. Tuition hold. Payment required. He didn't say anything about it. Instead, he asked a different question. "Who told you that you can't go in?" Emma stared at the paper. Her throat felt tight. She didn't want to say it. But something about the way he sat there made it feel safe to answer. "The office," she whispered. Another pause. Then she added quietly, "They said I have to wait." The man nodded slowly. He didn't argue. He didn't tell her the rule was unfair. He just stayed there beside her. Across the gate, a group of teachers finished guiding the last students inside. The security guard shifted his weight uncomfortably, glancing toward the man in the suit. Recognition slowly crept across the guard's face. Even people who didn't work in business knew that face. Jacob Reed. The name was printed on 2 plaques inside the school building. One for a technology lab. Another for a scholarship program. Money had a way of introducing people long before they met. The guard stepped closer. "Sir," he said carefully, "visitors need to check in at the front office." Jacob looked up calmly. "I will." But he didn't stand. The guard hesitated. He wasn't sure what to do with a billionaire sitting on a curb beside a child. So he said nothing else. Emma looked sideways at the man. "You're gonna be late," she said quietly. Jacob glanced toward the building. "Probably." Emma blinked. Adults didn't usually accept being late so easily. Most adults got frustrated about things like that. "Don't you have a meeting?" she asked. Jacob smiled faintly. "I always have meetings." Emma thought about that. Then she asked the question children asked when they were curious but trying to sound polite. "Are you rich?" Jacob didn't laugh. He simply nodded once. "Yes." Emma studied him again. He didn't look proud when he said it. He just sounded honest. After a moment she spoke again. "My mom says rich people are busy." Jacob looked out at the empty street for a second. "Most of them are." Emma tilted her head. "Then why are you here?" That question lingered in the air longer than either of them expected. Jacob leaned back slightly, resting his palms against the warm concrete. For a brief second he didn't answer. Because the truth was, he didn't fully know. Something about Emma sitting outside that gate had pulled him across the street without thinking. Maybe it was the way she hugged her backpack. Maybe it was the memory of standing alone outside a school building years ago. Or maybe it was the quiet way she had said those words. "Everyone got into class, except me." Jacob exhaled slowly. "Because I heard you," he said. Emma looked down again. The words made her chest feel tight. Adults heard things all the time. But they didn't usually stop. They kept walking. Across the street, Jacob's driver stood beside the black car, checking his watch for the 3rd time. He finally approached the curb carefully. "Mr. Reed," he said quietly, "the board members are already inside." Jacob nodded. "I know." The driver glanced at Emma, then back at Jacob. "Should I reschedule the meeting?" Jacob looked at the school gate again. The tall iron bars looked harmless from far away. But up close they felt different. Like a line drawn between 2 worlds. Inside the gate were classrooms, teachers, and opportunity. Outside the gate was a little girl pretending not to cry. Jacob stood up slowly. Emma immediately lowered her head again. She assumed he was leaving. Most people did. But instead of walking toward the school, Jacob extended his hand toward her. Not to shake. Just a simple gesture. "Come with me," he said gently. Emma looked up, confused. "They said I can't go in," she whispered. Jacob's voice stayed calm. "I know." Emma frowned. "Then where are we going?" Jacob glanced toward the school entrance. Then back at the folded paper in her hands. "First," he said quietly, "we're going to find out who decided a 7-year-old should wait outside a gate." Emma's heart started beating faster. She looked toward the office doors. Then back at him. "What if they get mad?" she asked. Jacob's expression didn't change. "They might." Emma swallowed. The security guard was watching them closely now. Teachers were walking past the lobby windows. Emma slowly stood up. Her small hand slipped into Jacob's larger one. For the first time that morning, she stepped off the curb, and together they began walking toward the school doors. Inside the building, the receptionist looked up from her desk. Her eyes widened immediately when she saw who had just walked in. But what truly shocked her was the little girl standing beside him. The receptionist straightened in her chair. Her eyes moved from Jacob Reed to the small hand he was holding, then back again. "Mr. Reed," she said, trying to sound calm even though her voice carried a trace of surprise. "Good morning." Jacob nodded politely. "Morning." Emma stood quietly beside him, clutching the folded paper against her chest again. Her shoes made almost no sound on the polished floor. The lobby felt bigger from the inside. Bright walls covered with colorful drawings. Construction paper suns, crayon trees, crooked little houses. Children's handwriting hung beneath them. "When I grow up, I want to be a firefighter. When I grow up, I want to help animals." Emma read them silently. None of them said what she had felt that morning. "When I grow up, I want to be allowed inside." The receptionist cleared her throat gently. "Mr. Reed, the donor breakfast started about 15 minutes ago." "I'm aware," Jacob replied calmly. Her eyes drifted to Emma again. "And this is?" Emma felt the room grow smaller. Her fingers tightened around the paper. Before she could speak, Jacob answered. "Emma Carter." The receptionist's expression changed just slightly. Recognition flickered across her face. Not surprise. Something closer to discomfort. "Oh," she said softly. Emma noticed it immediately. Children were good at reading faces. They knew when adults felt awkward. The receptionist glanced toward the hallway leading to the principal's office. "Dr. Bell is expecting you upstairs for the breakfast," she said carefully. Jacob didn't move. "I'd like to speak with him," he said. "Of course," she replied quickly. Her voice lowered a little. "Should I ask him to come down?" Jacob nodded. "That would be fine." The receptionist reached for the phone. Emma stood very still. She felt like everyone in the building could see her. Her backpack suddenly felt heavier. "What if they get mad?" she whispered to Jacob. Jacob leaned slightly closer so only she could hear him. "Sometimes people get mad when you ask fair questions," he said quietly. Emma looked down. "My mom says being quiet keeps things simple." Jacob studied her for a moment. "Sometimes it does," he said gently. "But sometimes quiet lets the wrong things keep happening." Emma didn't answer. The receptionist finished her call and hung up slowly. "Dr. Bell will be here in a moment." The seconds felt long. Through the hallway windows, Emma could see students walking between classrooms. Laughter echoed faintly from somewhere deeper in the building. Normal school sounds. Sounds she was supposed to be part of. Finally, footsteps approached. Dr. Harlan Bell appeared from the hallway. He was a careful man in his late 50s, with neatly combed silver hair and glasses that rested precisely on the bridge of his nose. His posture was calm, professional. But the moment he noticed Emma standing beside Jacob Reed, his expression tightened slightly. "Mr. Reed," he said politely, "I'm sorry we missed you at breakfast." Jacob extended his hand. "No problem." They shook hands. Dr. Bell's eyes moved again toward Emma. His voice remained controlled. "I see you've met one of our students." Emma lowered her head again. Jacob answered calmly, "Yes." A quiet pause followed. Dr. Bell folded his hands together. "Is there something I can help you with?" Jacob gestured gently toward Emma. "She told me she couldn't go to class today." Dr. Bell exhaled slowly. His expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes shifted into practiced explanation. "I assume you're referring to the tuition hold," he said. Jacob nodded. "That's what the paper says." Dr. Bell looked toward Emma. His voice softened slightly, the way adults often spoke to children when discussing uncomfortable rules. "Emma, sweetheart, we've talked about this." Emma nodded automatically. She had practiced nodding. Jacob noticed. Dr. Bell continued speaking, this time directing his explanation toward Jacob. "Westbrook operates through tuition contributions," he said calmly. "Families who fall behind on payments are asked to resolve the balance before attending classes." His words sounded polished, almost reasonable. Jacob listened without interrupting. "Policies like this help ensure fairness for all families," Dr. Bell finished. The receptionist watched quietly from behind her desk. Emma stared at the floor. Jacob finally spoke. "Fairness for who?" Dr. Bell blinked once. "For the families who meet their obligations," he answered. Jacob nodded slowly. Then he glanced around the lobby. At the colorful drawings. At the bright posters about opportunity and leadership. Then he looked back at the principal. "Do you believe keeping a 7-year-old outside the gate helps her learn responsibility?" Dr. Bell hesitated. It was only a second. But Emma noticed it. "Mr. Reed," he said carefully, "these decisions are never easy." Jacob's voice stayed calm. "Yet they're made every day." The air between them grew quiet. Behind the glass doors, a few parents passing the building slowed their steps. Some recognized Jacob. Some simply sensed tension. Dr. Bell adjusted his glasses. "I understand this may seem harsh," he said, "but policies protect the integrity of the school." Emma looked up at that word. Integrity. She didn't know exactly what it meant, but she knew how sitting outside the gate had felt. Jacob studied the principal for a long moment. Then he said something very simple. "I'd like to understand the full situation." Dr. Bell frowned slightly. "In what sense?" Jacob turned his head toward Emma. She was still holding the paper with the red stamp. Her fingers had begun to wrinkle the edges. "Before I decide whether a system is fair," Jacob said quietly, "I prefer to see how it treats the people with the least power." Dr. Bell looked at him carefully now. This conversation had shifted. It was no longer just a donor asking a question. Something deeper had entered the room. Finally, the principal nodded once. "If you'd like more context," he said, "our counselor has been working with the Carter family." Jacob's eyes remained steady. "I'd like to speak with her." Dr. Bell hesitated again. Then he gestured toward the hallway. "Ms. Ruiz's office is down this corridor." Jacob turned slightly toward Emma. "You okay to walk a little farther?" he asked. Emma nodded. But as they began moving toward the hallway, she tugged lightly on his sleeve. "Mr. Reed." He stopped and looked down at her. Her voice was very small. "If they say no again, do I have to go back outside?" Jacob held her gaze for a moment. Then he answered softly, "No." Emma blinked. "Why not?" Jacob looked toward the counselor's office door ahead of them. "Because today," he said quietly, "someone finally decided to ask the questions nobody wanted to hear." And inside that office, they were about to discover something far bigger than an unpaid tuition bill. Dr. Bell didn't answer right away. His eyes moved briefly toward the door, then back to the folder on the desk, as if the papers might offer a safer place to look. The silence stretched long enough for Emma to notice it. Children were good at that. They could feel when adults were choosing their words carefully. Jacob remained standing beside the chair, calm and patient. He wasn't raising his voice. He wasn't accusing anyone. But the question was still there, hanging quietly in the room. Who benefits if Emma loses her place here? Dr. Bell finally adjusted his glasses again. Westbrook receives many scholarship applications, he said slowly. Jacob's eyes didn't leave his face. That doesn't answer the question. The principal exhaled through his nose. It means, he continued carefully, that seats are limited. Emma frowned slightly. She didn't understand what seats had to do with her. Ms. Ruiz watched the exchange quietly. Jacob spoke again. So if a student loses their place. Dr. Bell finished the sentence for him. Another student may receive the opportunity. The words sounded simple, but they settled into the room like something heavier. Emma's small voice broke the silence. Am I losing my seat? Everyone looked at her. Dr. Bell's expression softened slightly. That hasn't been decided. Emma lowered her head. Jacob stepped closer to the desk. Has someone requested that scholarship spot? He asked. Dr. Bell didn't answer immediately, and that hesitation told Jacob almost everything he needed to know. Before the principal could speak again, a knock sounded at the door. 3 short taps. Dr. Bell straightened quickly. Come in. The door opened smoothly. The woman who stepped inside carried herself with quiet confidence. Elegant clothes. Perfectly styled hair. Sunglasses resting on top of her head even though they were indoors. Mara Kingsley. She paused when she noticed Jacob standing in the room. Then her lips curved into a polite smile. Well, she said lightly, I didn't realize we had such distinguished company this morning. Her voice sounded warm, but there was something calculated behind it. Jacob recognized that tone. He had heard it in boardrooms and fundraising galas. The voice of someone used to influence. Dr. Bell cleared his throat. Mara, this is Mr. Reed. Her smile widened slightly. Oh, I know exactly who Mr. Reed is. She stepped further into the office. Her eyes flicked briefly toward Emma, then back to Jacob. I heard you stopped by for breakfast earlier. I did, Jacob replied calmly. Mara tilted her head slightly. And instead you ended up here. Her gaze drifted toward the folder on the desk. Talking about tuition policies, I assume. Emma watched the woman carefully. Something about her made the room feel colder. Ms. Ruiz remained silent. Dr. Bell shifted in his chair. Mara clasped her hands together. Westbrook is very proud of its standards, she said smoothly. Jacob nodded once. I've read the brochure. A faint tension flickered across her smile. Our families expect consistency, she continued. That's how we maintain fairness. Emma looked at Jacob. She had heard that word again. Fairness. Jacob met Mara's gaze. And fairness means keeping a child outside the gate? Mara's expression didn't change. Policies apply to everyone, she said. Her voice stayed calm. Even when the situation is unfortunate. Emma's fingers tightened around her backpack strap. Jacob noticed. So this is just policy, he said. Mara nodded. Exactly. But something in her tone suggested she believed the conversation was already over. Jacob took a slow breath. Let me ask you something, he said. She raised an eyebrow. Of course. Jacob glanced briefly at Emma before returning his attention to Mara. Is there another student waiting for this scholarship seat? The room went very still. Dr. Bell looked down at the desk. Ms. Ruiz watched Mara carefully. For the first time, Mara didn't answer immediately. Instead, she walked slowly toward the window. Sunlight fell across her shoulder as she turned back toward the room. There are many families who would love the opportunity Westbrook offers, she said. That still doesn't answer the question, Jacob replied. Mara's smile thinned just slightly. One family in particular, she said. Emma felt a strange knot form in her stomach. She didn't understand the details, but she could feel the direction of the conversation. Mara continued. They've supported this school very generously over the years. Jacob nodded slowly. Generous families tend to expect results. Her eyes met his. Exactly. Emma looked down again. Her voice came out very small. So someone else wants my seat? No one answered her right away. Jacob crouched slightly so he was at her level. This isn't about you doing something wrong, he said gently. Emma searched his face. But they don't want me here. The words were quiet, but they landed hard. Jacob didn't rush to respond. He knew better than to offer quick comfort when a child had already seen the truth. Across the room, Mara spoke again. Our responsibility is to the school as a whole, she said. Her voice was smooth. Not just one family. Jacob stood slowly. And what about the child sitting outside the gate? Mara met his gaze without blinking. Emotional stories can make situations look unfair, she replied. But institutions survive by protecting their standards. Jacob studied her for a moment. Then he glanced toward Emma again. She was sitting very still in the chair, like someone trying to make herself small enough not to be noticed. A 7-year-old carrying the weight of adult decisions. Jacob turned back toward Mara. His voice stayed calm. But sometimes standards, he said quietly, are just a polite way of protecting power. For the first time, the room felt tense enough that even Emma noticed. Mara folded her arms slowly. If you believe the policy is wrong, she said coolly, you're welcome to challenge it. Her eyes held his steadily. There is a formal process. Dr. Bell looked uneasy. Ms. Ruiz remained silent. Emma watched Jacob carefully. She didn't know what a formal process meant, but she knew something important was happening. Jacob nodded once. Good. Mara's smile returned. Sharp. Controlled. Then I suggest you begin. Jacob glanced once more at the folder on the desk. Then at Emma. Her small shoulders looked heavy under the faded uniform. And suddenly something inside him settled. A decision. Quiet. Unshakable. He looked back at Mara. That's exactly what I plan to do. Mara didn't look worried. Not yet. Because people like her had seen wealthy men lose interest before. They walked away. Wrote a check. Moved on. But as Jacob turned toward the door, Emma tugged lightly on his sleeve. Mr. Reed. He looked down at her. What if we lose? She whispered. Jacob thought for a moment. Then he answered softly. Then we keep asking the truth louder. Emma stared at him. But what if they don't listen? Jacob glanced back toward Mara Kingsley. Then toward Dr. Bell. Then toward the quiet hallway outside. His voice lowered. Then we make sure the whole world hears it. And somewhere deep inside Westbrook Elementary, a quiet battle had just begun. The hallway outside the counseling office felt different now. Quieter. Heavier. Emma walked beside Jacob with small careful steps, her backpack still pressed against her shoulders like armor. She didn't look back at the office door after it closed behind them. Some part of her already understood that the conversation inside that room wasn't finished. Not even close. Jacob slowed his pace so she wouldn't have to rush to keep up. Children's voices drifted faintly through the classroom walls. Somewhere a teacher was explaining multiplication tables. Somewhere else a group of students laughed at something small and ordinary. Emma listened to those sounds like they belonged to another world. Mr. Reed? She asked softly. Jacob glanced down at her. Yeah. Did I do something wrong? The question came out so quietly it almost blended into the hum of the hallway lights. Jacob stopped walking. Emma stopped too. He crouched down slightly so they were eye to eye. "No," he said gently. Emma studied his face carefully. "Then why does that lady want my seat?" Jacob took a slow breath. He had spent most of his life negotiating billion-dollar deals, navigating boardrooms full of powerful people who knew how to hide their intentions behind polite language. But explaining that kind of world to a 7-year-old girl was different. "Sometimes," he said slowly, "grown-ups care more about influence than fairness." Emma frowned. "I don't know what influence means." Jacob gave a faint smile. "It means some people think their voice matters more than someone else's." Emma thought about that. Then she looked down at the floor. "My mom says rich people always win." The words were simple, but they carried a weight that didn't belong in the voice of a child. Jacob leaned back against the wall beside them. "That's not always true." Emma tilted her head. "Then why are they winning today?" Jacob didn't answer right away. Because the truth was complicated. And because she wasn't wrong. Across the lobby, the front doors opened. A few parents stepped inside to speak with the receptionist. Their voices echoed faintly across the polished floor. Jacob stood again. "Come on," he said gently. Emma followed him toward the lobby. As they reached the open space near the front desk, the receptionist glanced up again. Her eyes moved between Jacob and Emma with quiet curiosity. "Mr. Reed," she said carefully, "Dr. Bell asked if you would be attending the remainder of the breakfast." Jacob shook his head. "Not today." Emma looked at him. "You're leaving?" Jacob turned toward her. "No." The receptionist hesitated. "Would you like me to call your driver?" Jacob glanced out through the glass doors toward the street where the black town car still waited. Then he looked back at Emma. "Not yet." The receptionist nodded slowly. Emma shifted her weight from one foot to the other. She didn't know what happened next. And uncertainty was something children felt very clearly. Jacob walked over to a bench near the entrance and sat down. Emma hesitated. Then she sat beside him. For a moment neither of them spoke. Cars passed outside. Sunlight stretched across the floor through the tall glass doors. Finally Emma whispered something. "My mom's gonna be worried." Jacob looked at her. "She knows you're here." Emma blinked. "How?" "I called her." Emma's eyes widened slightly. "You talked to my mom?" Jacob nodded. "She was at work." Emma stared at him for a moment. "What did she say?" Jacob leaned back slightly against the bench. "She said the same thing you said." Emma tilted her head. "What?" "That you didn't do anything wrong." Emma looked relieved. But then the worry returned. "Is she mad?" Jacob shook his head. "No." Emma's voice dropped again. "She works a lot." "I know." Jacob had heard it in Sarah Carter's voice when she answered the phone earlier that morning. Exhaustion, strength, and a quiet kind of dignity that refused to beg. Emma swung her feet slightly above the floor. "She said she'd come after her shift." Jacob nodded. "She will." Emma looked toward the iron gate outside. Students were moving across the playground now during recess. A few children ran past the windows laughing. Emma watched them for a long moment. Then she asked something that sounded more like a thought than a question. "Do you ever get tired of being rich?" Jacob almost smiled. "That's not a question most people ask." Emma shrugged. "My mom says money solves problems." Jacob looked out toward the playground. "Sometimes it does." Emma turned toward him. "But not this one?" Jacob's gaze stayed on the gate. "No." Emma leaned her head slightly against the wall behind the bench. "Then what fixes it?" Jacob thought about Mara Kingsley's calm confidence. About Dr. Bell's careful silence. About the system that quietly decided which children were welcome and which ones were inconvenient. Truth, he said finally. Emma blinked. That's it. It's harder than it sounds. Emma considered that. Does the truth make people mad? Jacob nodded. Sometimes. Emma sighed softly. My mom says being brave usually gets you in trouble. Jacob looked at her again. She's not wrong. Emma looked puzzled. Then why are you doing it? Jacob didn't answer immediately. Because the real reason wasn't something he could explain with simple words. It had started with a whisper outside the gate. Everyone got into class, except me. A sentence that reached across time and reminded him exactly what it felt like to be the poor kid standing alone. Finally he said quietly, because someone should have done it for me. Emma didn't fully understand. But she nodded anyway. Across the lobby, the front doors opened again. This time the woman who stepped inside moved quickly, her hair slightly messy from the wind, her diner apron still tied around her waist. Sarah Carter. Her eyes scanned the room in a panic until they landed on Emma. Emma! Emma jumped off the bench immediately. Mom! Sarah crossed the floor in long hurried steps and wrapped her daughter in a tight hug. Are you okay? She asked breathlessly. Emma nodded against her shoulder. I'm okay. Sarah pulled back and looked at her carefully, checking her face, her hands, the way mothers always did when something felt wrong. Then she noticed Jacob standing beside them. Recognition crossed her expression slowly. You're the man who called me. Jacob nodded. Jacob Reed. Sarah looked between him and her daughter. What exactly is going on here? Her voice wasn't angry, but it carried the tension of someone who had spent too many years fighting to keep her life from falling apart. Emma held her hand tightly. Jacob met Sarah's gaze calmly. Your daughter deserves to be inside that school, he said. Sarah's eyes flickered toward the hallway leading to the offices. And the people in there don't think so? Jacob didn't answer. But the silence said enough. Sarah exhaled slowly. Then she looked back at him. All right, she said quietly. What happens now? Jacob glanced once more toward the counseling office, where the real fight had just begun. Then he looked back at Sarah Carter. Now, he said, we make sure the truth doesn't stay inside that building. Sarah Carter stood there for a moment, her hand still wrapped around Emma's small fingers. Her eyes moved from Jacob Reed to the hallway that led deeper into the school. The quiet tension in the building had not faded. If anything, it had grown heavier. Then let's not wait, she said softly. Jacob nodded once. They walked together toward the office hallway again. This time Emma didn't cling to her backpack the same way. Her mother's hand was steady in hers, and the man beside them had made it clear that he wasn't stepping away. Inside the counseling office, the air felt still. Ms. Ruiz looked up when they entered, her expression calm but alert. Dr. Bell stood near the window, and Mara Kingsley had remained in the room as well, her posture straight, her confidence polished. Sarah didn't hesitate. My daughter belongs in her classroom, she said quietly, her voice firm despite the exhaustion written across her face. Mara tilted her head slightly. Mrs. Carter, I understand this situation feels emotional, but policies exist for a reason. Sarah met her gaze. Policies shouldn't make a child feel like she's invisible. The room fell silent again. Jacob stepped forward, placing the folder from Ms. Ruiz gently on the desk. Inside were the reports they had just reviewed, attendance records, lunch account notes, the anonymous welfare concern filing, the eviction pressure that had quietly followed Sarah for months. These documents tell a story, Jacob said. Dr. Bell watched him carefully. A story about pressure, Jacob continued. A story about a system that punishes the families who are already carrying the most weight. Mara's smile tightened. Mr. Reed, you're turning a financial policy into something it isn't. No, Jacob replied calmly. I'm showing what it already is. Sarah squeezed Emma's hand gently. Look, she said quietly, her voice breaking for the first time. I'm not asking for favors. I've worked every shift they give me. I clean tables until midnight and wake up before sunrise just to keep our lives together. Emma looked up at her mother. Sarah continued, the words coming slowly but honestly. But my daughter shouldn't have to sit outside a gate while other kids walk past her like she doesn't belong. Ms. Ruiz lowered her eyes briefly, the truth of that moment settling over the room. Dr. Bell sighed and removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. The careful calm he had worn all morning began to slip. When we created these policies, he said quietly, the intention was to protect the school. Jacob nodded slightly. But protection without compassion, he said, becomes exclusion. Mara's voice sharpened. Standards matter. Jacob turned to her. Standards matter when they lift people, he said. Not when they push children down. Emma had been quiet the entire time, but now she stepped slightly closer to the desk. Her voice was small, but it carried through the room clearly. I just want to learn, she said. No one spoke for a moment. Because sometimes a simple sentence reveals more truth than 1,000 arguments. Dr. Bell looked at the folder again. The attendance chart. The lunch notes. The quiet evidence of a child trying her best inside a system that had quietly closed its doors. He exhaled slowly. Then he looked up. Emma Carter will return to class today, he said. Mara's head turned sharply. That decision requires board review, she insisted. Dr. Bell met her gaze. Then the board will review it. Emma looked up at her mother, confused but hopeful. Sarah knelt beside her and brushed a strand of hair away from her face. Looks like you're going to class, she whispered. Emma blinked, as if she wasn't sure she had heard correctly. Really? Jacob smiled faintly. Really? The hallway outside seemed brighter when they stepped out again. Students passed by between classes, laughter echoing through the corridor. Emma looked toward the classroom doors with wide eyes, the same doors she had believed were closed to her. A teacher appeared at the end of the hall, surprised to see her. Emma, she said gently, we've been wondering where you were. Emma hesitated, then looked up at Jacob. Go on, he said softly. She walked down the hallway slowly at first, then a little faster, until she reached the classroom door and stepped inside. The door closed behind her. For a moment, the hallway felt quiet again. Sarah stood beside Jacob, watching the door as if she were holding her breath. Then she let out a long exhale. Thank you, she said. Jacob shook his head slightly. You did the hard part. Sarah gave a tired smile. I almost didn't answer the phone this morning. Why? Because people with power don't usually show up for people like us. Jacob looked down the hallway where Emma had just disappeared. Maybe that's something we should change. Sarah nodded slowly. Outside the building, the iron gate buzzed open again as more children walked through. But this time no one sat alone beside it. Later that afternoon, Emma ran out of the school doors with a wide smile, waving a small drawing she had made in class. 3 figures stood beside a tall gate. All of them were walking through it together. Jacob looked at the picture for a long moment, because the truth of that day had become clear in the quietest way possible. The world didn't change because a rich man wrote a check. It changed because someone finally chose to stand beside a child who had been left outside. And sometimes the strongest kind of power isn't money. It's simply refusing to walk away when kindness is needed. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. And let me know in the comments which region of the world you're watching from.